So we're only a couple of days away from Chainsaw Man Part 2. Obviously, me, you, and everyone else, we're very excited. But you're probably wondering what this title means. Don't expect anything from Chainsaw Man Part 2. I have a good reason for this. For me, this is directly associated with the one-shot that Fujimoto just recently released, and how it's pretty much calling us all out for a lot of different reasons, and a lot of good ways, interesting ways, and maybe even bad ways, depending on how you perceive it. But it brings up a very interesting conversation leading into Chainsaw Man Part 2. As usual, this one shot, even though it's not drawn by him, feels very personal. It is intimate. It's his identity. Very similar to Look Back in Goodbye Eri, but the opposite this time. And it's kind of ironic that I'm here even talking about it and interpreting it certain types of ways, because this is what this story actually calls out. Interpretation, concept building, theorizing, being over analytical to certain things that don't actually need it. And even though this one shot kind of calls it out and puts it on the surface, I don't think it's actually the crux or the quote-unquote problem of the whole thing. There's kind of more to it. Firstly, this one shot details a very simple experience, one that might sound rather familiar. This young boy creates a confession, a love song, if you will, to only one individual, a specific woman that he's obviously crushing on, and he gives it to her. It's a YouTube link to a video. His confession, however, would go viral. First, it kind of floats around his classroom and then the school. She declines his confession, and then the whole world would start to catch on to it, raking up hundreds of thousands, millions upon millions of views, and become kind of a global phenomenon. There's a big reason for this, however. This simple love song and confession starts to be analyzed. It starts to be broken apart under a microscopic lens. People claiming that they can see ghosts. People claiming that if you play it backwards, it's a criticism of American gun culture. People claiming that when you translate the video into Spanish, the song denies the existence of God. More symbolism comes out, more views come in, more interpretation comes in. More and more people were finding interesting things that were never intended in that confession video, and it goes absolutely viral. With this interpretation comes the problem, and what I think is the crux of this whole story: expectation. People are fiending for his second song, fiending for the next thing. Remember, this was just a simple confession love song to one person, yet now the whole world wants a second one. Everyone's asking for it, everyone's demanding it. Where is it? So the main character writes a second song. After all of it, very fittingly titled Just Listen to the Song, which is also the name of the manga. And I quote, "Nobody's expectations were met in my second video. It was globally panned and people lost interest. I deleted my videos." However, after all of this backlash, his crush would ultimately give him the perfect description of what these songs were about. Both of the songs are about when he sketched her in middle school, and that it's very cringy. But just her acknowledging and recognizing the true understanding of the song, because it was only for her originally, seemingly fills him with joy, with happiness, with content. The message or the meaning for his song got to the only person he wanted to get it to originally, and that would be the end of the story. Does any of this sound a little bit familiar? Maybe Chainsaw Man Part 2, the excitement we have for it, the amount that a lot of us have theory crafted and analyzed and has speculated and done all of these deep dives into his narratives, his stories, his world and characters, but it comes at a cost. The expectation is constantly getting built, and for an author, expectations is probably one of the most difficult things I imagine to deal with, especially if you're not putting the emphasis there for a story to be overanalyzed, to be theory crafted, to be overly analytical in certain aspects, and to spiral down this path of ultimate speculation. Could you see how your level of expectation because of it is kind of harmful? You hype yourself up for something super incredible, super exciting, yet you don't get it. It never reaches that level of hype or excitement that you have. And it all slowly kind of trickles from those very speculative things you're doing. And this is kind of what the story is implying, with not only how it affects authors and creators around the globe, but Fujimoto himself. Even what I'm doing now is kind of ironic in a sense, but I wouldn't be surprised if Fujimoto himself is concerned or scared or worried that Part 2 of Chainsaw Man won't live up to the expectation, the unlikely expectation, I should say, that most likely people have created. From that speculation, from that overanalyzation, the theory crafting, and everything else in between. He's not telling you to stop doing those things, but to try not to hype yourself up, and quite literally in his own words, just listen to the song, just read the story. How you perceive it and indulge within it is entirely up to you, but don't let that control your expectation. Don't let that control your hype, because nothing will ever reach it. Whatever Fujimoto done will never reach the hype and excitement that is so high for yourself potentially. Admittedly, it can be a very difficult thing to do, especially if you're surrounded by such a passionate fan base. You can get swept up in all of this excitement and hype and ultimately be crushed when you don't receive even a portion of it. The story could be perfect, it could be magnificent, it could be amazing, but because you've gone so high with this level of expectation, it just can't reach it. So the story you get, you don't see it the same way. You don't see it as the magnificent masterpiece that it could actually be, but instead you're already disappointed it's not something more. And there's a quoted phrase in Fujimoto's one-shot that I think a lot of you might find interesting, and it is said, quote unquote, form is emptiness. Where this comes from is Buddhism, and it is said that emptiness as form refers to a Buddhist text called the Heart Sutra, which is the distillation of all teachings on emptiness. Emptiness in Buddhism refers not to nothingness, but to the opposite, the interdependence of all phenomena, both mental and physical. This would also be known as sunyata. It's a key concept used to express that everything one encounters in life is empty of absolute identity, permanence, or an indwelling self, because everything is interrelated and mutually dependent, never wholly self-sufficient or independent. Bear with me, I know that might have sounded confusing hearing all of this stuff just jammed together into one big word soup, but to simplify it in its barest of forms, everything comes from something. There is meaning and identity kind of born and conceptualized from other things that can all be linked and intertwined and weaved and created from one another. They're all connected in some sense. What this phrase is meant to represent, saying form is emptiness or emptiness is form, is quite literally that everything is connected to one another. Everything that you encounter is empty of absolute identity. Nothing is necessarily ever unique because it's born out of so many differing ideas to create that uniqueness. Now, admittedly, my interpretation of that might be wrong, but I think when you kind of apply that to literature, for example, it's something very similar. You can get very unique stories that are built off the foundation of many differing things that aren't even related to it, but at the very core of literature is interpretation. Everyone is going to read the story differently. Everyone's going to view and experience the story differently. It's what creates such a beautiful and compassionate community that's so intoxicated by this one story, by the many stories that they might indulge within. It's why both me, you, and everyone else can have a back and forth conversation about how we interpret certain things within this story. I see things this way and why I like it or why I might dislike it, but you may see the complete opposite. You may see something else entirely and provide that in response, which changes my perspective, and vice versa. So ultimately, we're just giving each other interpretations of literature and stories and characters and themes and concepts, all of these differing things that can create this unique sense of dialogue and level of expectation. And when you let that level of expectation get too high and dictate your excitement and your enjoyment, and you want something that is so unreachable, you have to dial it back. As you can probably tell, for such a simple, straightforward one-shot with Fujimoto saying all of these things in the barest of forms, still you can create a video like this, which is ironic in its shadow. It's not meant to be like this. He's not telling you to not theory craft and speculate and kind of apply all of these things. I think he's just telling you not to get your hopes up, to be open, just to quite literally listen to the song, just to read the story, just to try to enjoy it. Chainsaw Man Part 2 may not live up to the expectation or hype that Part 1 generated. And there's a lot of other bigger reasons for that. The fact that he's in Weekly Shonen Jump, a main public spotlight. The fact that he probably didn't expect the worldwide fame to completely absorb around him so quickly in such a short amount of time in such a massive and viral way for all of his works. So when I say don't expect anything from Chainsaw Man Part 2, when I say don't have a level of expectation, it's me trying to say don't hype yourself up to something that can't be reached. It's fine to be excited, but don't let that excitement control your enjoyment for the story. It may be completely different. It's most likely going to be completely different. It may feel different. It's not within Weekly Shonen Jump anymore. It doesn't have to dictate or be molded by certain formulas and ideas and popularity polls, etc., etc. It can do what it wants now that it's within very open and liberating Jump Plus. This is where Fujimoto thrives. This is where he originally came from. This is his home. And he can write Chainsaw Man Part 2 the way he wants to write it, the way he envisions it. Is that going to be different to Part 1 that was within Weekly Shonen Jump, that's heavily dictated and controlled and overshadowed by editors and departments and other things going on? Most likely. It's not like like it's going to alienate itself, but it'll probably feel different. At the end of the day, Fujimoto is a phenomenal author, absolutely incredible. A lot of his work is inherently interpretive, very open to differing ideas and concepts and theories and a lot of different things. Chainsaw Man Part 2 isn't going to be bad, but it might be different. It might be different to what you expect. It might conflict or clash with your level of expectation that you've built because of that theory crafting potentially, because of the wants and things that you feel like needed to be provided. In his own words, just listen to the song, just read the manga, try to enjoy it for what you can, and if it's not for you, that's perfectly fine too. You'll move on and find other great stories to fall in love with. I think it's very safe to say that a lot of you here are massive fans of Fujimoto's works, his one-shots, Chainsaw Man, Fire Punch, whatever it may be. You enjoy his style, his authenticity, the identity that he brings forward within his work, so you probably have nothing to really worry about. You're going to enjoy most likely whatever he brings forward, especially this one-shot being so simple and straight to the point, giving us all the answers we've ever wanted. No theory crafting, no speculation, just straight to the point. And even then, his stuff is very interpretive, which makes all of this kind of ironic and funny, but in my opinion worthwhile. Makes for a healthy dialogue between me and you and the whole community surrounding Chainsaw Man and all of his works, in a respectful way of course. If there's anything to take away from this, it's that Fujimoto isn't telling us as readers to not analyze his work, to not theory craft, to not be critical or to over-analyze every speculative thing that is tiny, all the way up to massive things. It is that if you intend to do any of those things, don't lose sight of what the story is trying to tell you. Don't let it warp down this path of blowing something that is inconsequential to the story into something that becomes its primary focus for yourself. To lose sight of what the whole point of the narrative was. And when you never get a response to that minute detail now becoming your primary focus, don't let your own expectation blow up to something that will never be reached, something that will never be answered. Finding meaning in literature and art is a beautiful thing. Being interpretive within literature and art is a beautiful thing. And when it connects and clicks with yourself and the author's intention, you get nothing but a beautiful understanding of what the story is trying to do. Both being fulfilling for not only yourself, but for the author, just like the ending of this one shot. Chainsaw Man Part 2 is a couple of days out. I'm 100% making a lot of videos on it, so look forward to that. But I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Drink plenty of water, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.